intro that you saw at the very start. It is Christmas season. When we think of Christmas, we think of family, we think of friends, we think about potentially 2 weeks or a few days off work, we think about eating lots of food, drinking lots of alcohol, all these parties and all those kind of things. But I think another aspect of what makes Christmas so special is the television that's always on and all the films that we watch throughout the month leading up to Christmas. I feel it's a really significant part in how we celebrate Christmas as well, and how we get excited and build up that festive spirit every single year. And when you think about most people who watch films over the course of the year, they normally don't re-watch a specific film at a specific time, but when it comes to Christmas, they'll watch a collection of films to, like I said, build up that festive spirit, build up the excitement of Christmas, and especially as far as the older films are concerned, relive their childhood and nostalgia. So in a way, it's that element of childhood that combines with the excitement of Christmas as an adult, and that's how I see it anyway. So we mainly watch Christmas films for the buzz and the excitement. I'm going to be ranking my top 5 Christmas films from 5 all the way down to 1. So without further ado, this is my top 5 Christmas films. Let's get started with number 5. Right, I can imagine people watching this would be kind of surprised, but also not surprised that I've included A Christmas Carol in my top 5 Christmas films. Of course, everybody knows that A Christmas Carol is the beloved novel from Charles Dickens, and in many ways I feel that the story in general transcended the way that people celebrate Christmas now. Not just from a literature perspective and film and television one, but also a cultural one too. It kind of changed people's perception on it. But of course, due to that impact, we've had a significant amount of productions and adaptations of A Christmas Carol over the years. We've had theatre productions, we've had films, we've had TV shows, we've also had some radio productions as well. And of course, these adaptations of A Christmas Carol have always had the unique twists and turns that are traditional in terms of the story and what is involved, but in terms of how it's done, it's obviously had a few differences. So of course I couldn't not include the ultimate Christmas story without mentioning what is my personal favourite adaptation, and that is the 2009 animated film starring Jim Carrey. The reason why I chose this particular one is that when I went to watch it in the cinema 10 years ago, I was just enchanted by every single thing about it. It was just an adventurous story about Scrooge. Of course, we all know the story of the character and his redemption and the ghosts of Christmas past, present, future, etc. I think what's special about the animated version of A Christmas Carol, even though I think a lot of people had a few mixed opinions about it because of Jim Carrey's portrayal of Scrooge, which I absolutely loved, by the way. And I think what was particularly special about this version of A Christmas Carol was that I think it was trying to appeal to a 21st century audience by throwing in the traditions of the 1843 novel. Of course, it's a very traditional story. It followed many aspects of the novel, and it didn't have such unique twists and turns that we've always seen in previous adaptations in the past. And I think using the traditional story of A Christmas Carol was good to this audience because of the use of 3D animation and the visual effects and the use of motion capture and all these things, and I think that's what was really good about it. I think that's why it struck that balance between old and traditional in terms of the actual story, and recent and groundbreaking in terms of visuals for the present day. And as I mentioned, Jim Carrey plays Ebenezer Scrooge, as well as the ghosts of Christmas past, present and future. He plays an abundance of different characters, and in many ways he kind of carries the film. Even though it's got a fantastic ensemble cast including Gary Oldman as Cratchit, Colin Firth as Fred, and among others. It was just a really good ensemble cast who brought the traditions of the characters into something for a 21st century audience, hence the visuals. And what I like as well is the fact that on the Blu-ray that I've got, you can actually watch the film in animation with a little corner screen of the actual motion capture performances as it's going along. So you can watch both the motion capture and the actual animated film as well. So that was quite educational in that regard. As far as Jim Carrey is concerned, when he played Scrooge, he still had that very bitter old, bah, humbug attitude about him where that was very honourable towards the book, but at the same time he brought like a slapstick kind of feeling to the character, which is Jim Carrey to a T. But at the same time he brought a slapstick factor about Scrooge where it wasn't necessarily funny, but it was just the physicality of the character. And I think the slapstick works because Ebenezer Scrooge is quite a theatrical character anyway, and Jim Carrey is also a very theatrical actor, usually because of his slapstick. That has been a clinical part in the success as far as Jim Carrey's career is concerned, especially in the 90s and the noughties. And I thought he played Scrooge really, really well. He really did. Of course, with the other characters he portrays, the ghosts as well. He gave his own unique interpretation of those characters. He portrayed those characters who were all very different. It's definitely a theatrical, exaggerated Jim Carrey performance, and it works really, really well. But I think what surprised me about this particular adaptation was that as adventurous and as magical as it was in terms of visuals, in terms of characters, it was actually quite scary as well. It was quite spooky, and I think the tone of it worked really well because of the music, because of the setting at night, and of course the camera shots as well. So for all those reasons, the 2009 animated version of A Christmas Carol is my absolute favourite adaptation. I love watching it every single year. It gets me in the festive spirit. It's underrated, I would say. It's something that I don't think people appreciate enough compared to other Christmas films. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Moving on to number 4. Oh, what a coincidence! Another Jim Carrey Christmas film. Now this is one I absolutely love, and I have loved since the film came out 20 years ago. God, it's crazy even saying that it's been out for that long. But anyway, I remember watching it when I was young and just being absolutely hooked by it. It was just something about How the Grinch Stole Christmas, or simply The Grinch, that was just so enchanting, so magical, and just so heartwarming and hilarious that it was just such a clinical part of how I would watch Christmas films as a child growing up. And a lot of that was down to Jim Carrey's portrayal of the Grinch. Again, I talked previously about his portrayal of Scrooge in A Christmas Carol, but as far as the Grinch is concerned, he did definitely have that slapstick factor that everyone knows him well for in the 90s, but he definitely did bring a lot of heart and soul into the film too, especially with all the makeup that he had on his face, which I dread to think how it must have been for him. But he definitely did bring the Grinch character to life, and I think that's what's so timeless about Jim Carrey's portrayal of that character, because obviously it's Jim Carrey's portrayal of the Grinch that makes the film so timeless for Christmas in general, but of course it's a Dr. Seuss adaptation as well, and it previously did have a cartoon version before this one, and has since had another animated remake a couple of years ago. And it's interesting because for a kids film, they don't usually have the protagonist as the antagonist, because of course the Grinch is the main character, but he's also the villain of the story because he hates Christmas, he wants to steal Christmas, but he's also the character that we follow along with. Because we know Jim Carrey's an actor who is well known for his slapstick and his very warped, humorous portrayals of certain characters. I think that's what makes it more likeable, almost like a panto. Although you could argue it's more a Jim Carrey slapstick comedy than it is a Dr. Seuss adaptation. Of all the films that I have seen over the years, I don't think I've seen many films that have got such impressive production design, a unique display of costumes, and just an overwhelmingly brilliant supply of makeup. The production values of The Grinch were just unbelievable. At the time, I don't think people realise how astonishing the production values are of The Grinch. And if anything, when you look back 20 years on, it's aged absolutely superbly. It really, really has. And I think because they don't use that much CGI, I mean obviously they had the right moments, but because they use actual sets, they use obviously a ridiculous amount of makeup. It just brought Dr. Seuss's characters to life even more in a more authentic way than say one would by using CGI. I think that's what's realistic about The Grinch in that regard, despite being a very warped story in general from Dr. Seuss, which in many ways does rip off A Christmas Carol, but it's something that I just can't not love when I watch it every year at Christmas. I always smile, I always laugh, I always get emotional watching it as well, because of course the short story doesn't go that much into the Grinch character, and this particular film explores that character in more detail, more than anything to add to the running time of the film, but it works because it got us to know the Grinch a lot more and get more involved in Jim Carrey's portrayal of that character. Just the relationship he had with Martha May and with the mayor from school days up to the present day. And I think to an extent, the film does display themes of racism as well, especially as far as the relationship between the Grinch and the mayor is concerned, which I think is a very educational and interesting angle to go down for a children's film. And despite that, it really captured every single feeling about what is so special about Christmas, not just in terms of the present wrapping and all the lights and just the environment and the atmosphere, but just the people around you as well, you know, your family, your friends, and of course that's what the message of the film is. But The Grinch though is just a beloved Christmas film, and I can't believe how panned it was when the film came out by critics, because they absolutely hated it, they absolutely ripped it to shreds. But in terms of Christmas and capturing that theme and the spirit, there aren't many films out there that do it better, in my honest opinion. It's wonderful, it's absolutely wonderful. So, moving on to number 3. Now, if there's any film in history that's just so delightful, that doesn't need to take itself serious in any way, shape or form, it would have to be Love Actually. So the film celebrates Christmas in London and stars some of the most notorious British actors, including Colin Firth, Liam Neeson, Emma Thompson, the late Alan Rickman, Hugh Grant, Martine McCutcheon, Laura Linney, Keira Knightley, Rowan Atkinson, Bill Nighy, Martin Freeman, Chiwetel Ejiofor, and the list goes on. Even Ant and Dec make cameos. While people criticise it for being too cheesy, and it is too cheesy, let's face it, and to be fair, that is the point of it, because it doesn't need to be taken seriously, because the film is about love and romantic relationships, and it explores them in different ways and different angles, and of course people express their love a lot of the time through the Christmas tradition, and it builds up to the Christmas season, and then when it does hit Christmas, they come together, and then when that happens, it just creates this magic sense of warmth inside you, and that's what I don't think people appreciate enough, and that's why it's something that you can't not love about Love Actually. It's just, it makes me smile, it creates happiness, it creates sadness for other storylines as well, but it just brings a lot of joy, and I think that's what Christmas is about, the ability to forget the bad things that happen in the world, to appreciate the things that we do have in our lives. And of course Love Actually does that, because obviously it's a very unrealistic portrayal of London, but because it's around Christmas and it's about those relationships, that it does follow those cliched storylines, and it works really, really well. So it's pretty much giving us things that we just want to see, not how things actually are. So in many ways it's a bunch of fairy tale stories really. I remember when I was at uni I did an essay on Love Actually, as well as other films like Bridget Jones, and how they're like fairy tale stories. The film does have a fairy tale like structure that does specifically focus on different relationships, and they are metaphors for things like princes, princesses, villains, donors, helpers, all those kinds of things. That's a nice throwback as far as uni is concerned, but I just think Love Actually is a festive classic that is just beloved by so many people in a number of different ways. Every single relationship is something that at least one person in the world can relate to. So I think the number of different characters that are involved in the film establish that exaggerated version of love and relationships, while also bringing in the festive joy and spirit of Christmas. A bit like a live-action Disney story. In fact, it would probably work as a Disney film, to be honest. It is among my favourite Christmas films, which reminds me, we are now down to my 2 favourite Christmas films. Let's get on with number 2 before we go on to number 1, so let's go. Right, so this might be controversial, but I've decided to include both Home Alone and Home Alone 2 Lost in New York as my joint number 2 favourite Christmas film. Yes, they're 2 films that came out at separate times, but as individual films and how much I enjoy them, they're pretty much inseparable. Not to mention they pretty much have the exact same story, but within a different setting. So characterisations between the 2 films remain the same, including Kevin himself, Harry and Marv, Kevin's family, but other supporting characters who have similar roles in Kevin's life, while Home Alone and City Alone. The plot's comical and unrealistic in the sense that you see a child living independently and managing to outmaneuver two burglars who are trying to break into his house on Christmas Eve. I just feel that seeing this joyous and Christmas time makes it all the more memorable and festive. They're both films that'll make you smile, but they're also both as comical and enlightening as a traditional Christmas pantomime. And comical in regards to how can a parent forget a child on holiday? Not once,
Kevin!
but twice. The films don't necessarily represent the family's negligence, because obviously that would be a major issue. But being a family film, I think it's more so her forgetfulness, which helps because of Kevin's independence. And the fact his family never even knew about Harry and Marv. So Macaulay Culkin plays Kevin in what is probably one of the most beloved, timeless child star performances of all time. He plays that babyface sweet and innocent kid, but he's also like one of those despicable but friendly enough children you might remember from your old school days, which I certainly do. And who could forget Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern as Harry and Marv? Pesci is perhaps more a serious actor, having been in crime and drama films over the years, but while he still plays that criminal character, but he goes down a different route this time because he plays one of the two idiotic burglars who try and break into Kevin's family home. And weirdly, Home Alone was released in 1990, which was the same year that Joe Pesci actually won the Oscar for Goodfellas. And Daniel Stern is perhaps the less known of the two of them, who plays this kind of giant oaf character in Marv. And together, they both represent like a Horace and Jasper kind of duo, who are criminals, but they're idiots at the same time. And I think what I love about Harry and Marv as well is that they think they're clever because they try and take advantage of people through the Christmas period, which of course was in the first one when the family went away, and in the second one when, and around the Christmas period in a busy city like New York, children are going to be buying more toys from the local toy store, and they take advantage of that because of the money involved, and it obviously ultimately backfires on them. And it just goes to show for me, and this is how I see it, that not even idiots or nobody can spoil the festivities and celebrations surrounding Christmas time. And that's why they both do play these kind of panto villains, especially during the sequences with the traps, which honestly still make me absolutely howl with laughter today. The first one and the second one, they're all different, but I think what's so brilliant is that how are they alive? They're like cats with 9 lives, because what they go through in normal life, they'd be dead. But I think the slapstick humour and the wit of those traps create that magical festive occasion for families to sit together and happily enjoy watching these two guys get absolutely destroyed by a little kid.
You guys give up, or you're thirsty for more?
But honestly, Daniel Stern and Joe Pesci were just amazing as Harry and Marv, and their chemistry with Macaulay Culkin was just top notch. It really, really was. If they ever remade Home Alone, heaven forbid, it just would not be topped. And that's why I would still say that the second one, in my opinion, is just as good as the first one. Like, would the films be as fun, as enjoyable, and would the traps be as funny if it wasn't set at Christmas time? Makes me wonder, because there's a reason why they did the second one set at Christmas again. The timing of it all as well, that it's not something to be taken too literally, too seriously. And that's what I think Christmas films are about. They're not going to be the best films of all time and the most amazing technically, but they are definitely going to be in terms of capturing the hearts of the audience, and that's what Christmas is about. And I think Home Alone 1 and 2 completely justify that, and that's why they are among my absolute favourite Christmas films of all time. So I've gone through 4 of my 5 top Christmas films of all time, but what will be my number 1 Christmas film ever? Let's find out. Of course, it had to be It's a Wonderful Life because, well, it's a wonderful film. So the film takes place over the course of one's life, and that man's name is George Bailey, played by the late James Stewart. And George is basically an ordinary man who rises through the ranks in his family business, which at a later stage in the film goes to pot when he just goes through a mental breakdown and is on the verge of suicide on Christmas Eve. Even though we were introduced to Clarence the Angel at the very beginning of the film, we saw him in human form this time as he appears to George and shows him what life would be like in Bedford Falls if he never existed. And it turned out it would be totally different. And just going through the different scenarios that were previously in the film, that ultimately show how valuable his life is. And again, that's why a film like this is important around Christmas too. Because life is important, life is valuable, and it can be so easily taken away from us. And that's why it's such an important film around Christmas time, because that's what Christmas is in general, isn't it? You know, about appreciating things that we have and loving our families and friends. Eventually George realises the value of his own life as well as life in general, and what better way to spend it surrounded by your friends and family at Christmas time. And of course that's the pinnacle of Christmas, about being with your loved ones and celebrating the things that we do have in life and appreciating them. And on that day when he thought his life was going to be over, George received the best Christmas gift anybody could ever have, which of course is the love and friendships of the people in his life. And that ending is it's just one of the most wonderful, magical, happiest and inspiring scenes ever. And that particular scene just captures that Christmas spirit, and it truly did capture, and that final scene truly did capture that Christmas spirit of being surrounded by your loved ones. And that's all we want in life, isn't it? You know, we just want our friends and our families and our homes, and to do that at Christmas time is just the best feeling in the whole world. It really, really is. And that final scene in It's a Wonderful Life, and the film in general, just typifies the beauty of the world and just the magic and the pure enchantment of Christmas. It probably is among my top 10 films of all time in general, and that's saying something. So what's your favourite Christmas film? Are there any Christmas films that I haven't highlighted that you think should have been included in this video? Drop me a comment below and let me know what you think. If you did go on to enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, and have a notification bell ticked every single time I upload a video. And the last thing I want to say is I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I'll catch you in the next video. Take care.